Definitely procedural. Capture our conceptual and our procedural gaps. And I think for the most part, your students were following in the procedural. You do have a few that you were saying when you saw those hundreds in there that it's more of a conceptual gap, but most of ours were in the procedural gap.
So for today, why don't we focus on the procedural gap, because I feel like that's where most of your students fell, is that procedural gap.
I would say first would be able to translate the picture form to the standard form.
I think that's perfect. I think that's where we should lock in. So let's lock in there. And so if we're locking in there, and just to make sure that we're all clear what that means, it's basically students will represent a 10 using a stick and a 1 using a circle. And since we want to add on that continuous count that we're not going to list, that's how we're going to list it. So that's our exemplar. All right, so now once you take your test papers, I want you to take a look closely at that question and how students responded. I want you to list your students' names that you will need to pull for reteach based on how they responded to that NBT1 question. So take 2 minutes to just thumb through your test and list the students' names who made that error. Now that we've gone through and we've identified our students, we've identified our gaps, let's select our reteach structure. I want you to think of which reteach structure we should use, modeling or guided discourse, and tell me why.
So for me, I'll probably start out with modeling. The majority of my students did not use their problem-solving strategy, so I'll go back and reteach that 3R problem-solving strategy. The students who were able to still find the answer in their head, I'll go with guided discourse for them, just to go back and show them, remind them to show their work.
Okay, so now think specifically towards the gap. The gap that we identified was the students were having a difficult time drawing an accurate picture, representing our 10s as sticks and our 1s as circles, and then transferring that, so counting appropriately, transferring that to the standard form. So when you think of that, and those are the students that you've listed, which one would you select, modeling or guided discourse?
I still think modeling with them.
And tell me why.
Just because just the amount of students that made that error and the amount of students that weren't able to solve that problem, I think that we really need to go back and start from the bottom, being very explicit, and reteach that skill.
Perfect. And Bloomy, what are your thoughts?
Well, looking at the names, these are the ones that still can't skip count by 10s, and so we are still doing the very basic. It's got to be modeling, it's got to be, we're going to be building it, we're going to be looking at the words, building it and building it and building it again, because these are kids that I already know don't have a strong foundation in place value.
Perfect. Okay, so now what we are going to think of in that error, and Christine, you already shared you're going into guided discourse for your block. And tell me why you're going into guided discourse.
Going into guided discourse because a majority of their concerns were just reading the problem carefully, so then showing them the proper way to model the equation, and then making sure that also kind of discussing going through using those problem-solving strategies to read the problem carefully in order to make sure that they've addressed all of the areas in the word problem.
Yeah. So we're going to take about 7 minutes to write your script. Leanne and I are going to do the same thing, and then we'll go from there and we'll spar against that exemplar.
So, based on what you were talking about, both of you were talking about, we need to model, and you nailed it. We need to build it, draw it, count it, and record it, because those were our errors. Some of them are still at the place where they need to use the concrete and build it, and then we need to take that building to draw it, and then give them the strategy to skip count, and then that final form of that standard form. So I'm going to read to you, or go through my script with you. I see this card has 7 groups of 10 and 4 ones. So I need to build a model that shows 7 10s and 4 ones. I will get 7 sticks and represent my 10s. I will get 4 ones to represent my 4 ones. Now that I have my model, I need to draw my model. I see that I have 7 tens. I will draw 7 sticks to represent my tens and draw 4 circles to represent my ones. And now I'm going to count. I will count my 10 sticks and ones to see how many I have all together. This will ensure that I have double checked my counting. When I count my tens, I count by tens because they represent a group of 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. I'll hold that 70 in my head, and now I'm going to count my ones. I count by ones because a 1 is a value of 1. Remember that 70, and now let's count on 71, 72, 73, 74. And finally, I'm going to record my standard form of 7-4 for 74. Now, what did I do in my model?
Build it, draw it, count it, record it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. What are key things to remember when you're doing your model?
You went very explicitly, step by step, what to do first and what to do after that.
And why you're
And
doing
why.
each step.
And the vocabulary is consistent,
Right, absolutely.
and we didn't leave out any step for them. Because as I went through my script, there were pieces I remembered when I said it out loud that I realized I needed to add back in. So rehearsing it out loud is even important because you realize things that you miss. Anything else to add?
Okay, so now let's go back to your reteach, and if there's something that you want